Hello everyone. Thank you all for watching the video and leaving such heartfelt comments. Wishing the whole family good health and peace. The morning after, soft sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a warm glow on Diep's small house nestled in the peaceful countryside. Diep had just woken up and was sweeping the yard when she heard unfamiliar footsteps. A young woman, dressed elegantly in a light brown coat, walked up to the porch. Diep was startled, unsure of who this stranger was, and asked hesitantly, "Who are you?" The woman smiled gently and replied, "I'm a teacher. James hired me to tutor you." Diep, still confused, invited the woman inside. They sat at an old wooden table, next to a small blackboard James had prepared earlier. The teacher, named Hung, picked up a piece of white chalk and began writing the first letters. ABC. Diep watched intently, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. For the first time in her life, she was learning to read and write, each stroke of chalk on the board opening up a new world for her. Hung guided her patiently, her voice warm and encouraging. "Try holding the chalk and writing the letter A." Diep hesitated, her hand trembling slightly, but after a few attempts she managed to write a round, neat joy spread across her face as she beamed, feeling as though she had accomplished something miraculous. Hung smiled back, praising her. "Well done, Diep. Keep it up." The lesson continued for a while until Hung received a phone call. She apologized to Diep, explaining that she had an urgent matter to attend to and had to leave. Diep nodded, walking her to the door, her heart still soaring from what she had learned. From a distance, James, whom Diep called Zio James, had been quietly observing the lesson, his eyes filled with satisfaction. As Hung stepped out, he approached her, gratitude in his voice. "Thank you so much, Ms. Hung. Because of you, Diep has had a great start." Hung smiled, nodded, and left. James entered the house and saw Diep still sitting at the table, diligently practicing the letters she had just learned. He sat down beside her and asked, "What did you learn today, Diep?" Diep looked up, her face lighting up with excitement. "I can write A and B now on." James examined the wobbly letters on the board, his heart swelling with pride. He patted her head, encouraging her. "That's amazing. Keep trying, okay? Tomorrow, I'll ask Miss Hung to come back." Looking out at the yard, James suddenly remembered the persimmons they had picked the day before. He suggested, "Diep, how about we take these persimmons to the city market to sell? What do you think?" Diep nodded eagerly, her eyes shining. "Yes, I'd love that. Selling at the market sounds so fun on." James chuckled and agreed. They began gathering the persimmons, preparing for their trip to the market. As they packed the fruits into baskets, Diep couldn't stop talking about how excited she was to see the bustling market. She imagined the crowds, the colorful stalls, and the people who might buy their persimmons. James listened, amused by her enthusiasm, but his mind was also on the lesson. He felt a deep sense of responsibility to ensure Diep's education continued, knowing how much it meant to her. The air was filled with the scent of ripe persimmons as they worked together. Diep carefully placed each fruit into the basket, making sure none were bruised. She wanted everything to be perfect for their first market day. James, meanwhile, thought about how far Diep had come since he took her under his wing, and how this simple act of selling persimmons could teach her even more about life. Before they left, Diep ran back to the table to look at her letters one more time. She traced the A and B with her finger, whispering to herself, "I'll learn more tomorrow." James called out to her, "Let's go, Diep. The market awaits." With a final glance at the blackboard, Diep grabbed her basket and followed him, her heart full of hope and anticipation. The sun was high in the sky, its golden rays stretching across the road leading to the city market. James rode an old motorbike with Diep sitting behind him, holding two baskets of ripe persimmons. Diep clung to his waist, her voice full of questions. Is the market crowded? Will people buy our persimmons?" James laughed, reassuring her. "It's very busy, don't worry. Our persimmons are sweet. Everyone will love them." They arrived at the market and found a small spot near the entrance, where people were constantly passing by. Together, they spread out a large mat and arranged the persimmons neatly. The golden, round fruits looked so inviting that Diep couldn't help but wipe each one carefully, muttering to herself, "We have to make them look nice so people will want to buy." James watched her, his heart warmed by her dedication. Soon their first customer approached, an elderly woman who stopped and asked, "How much for a kilo of persimmons, dear?" Diep replied quickly, "It's 20,000 dong per kilo, but they're really sweet." The woman smiled kindly, picked out a few and said, "You're so sweet, I bet these persimmons are just as good." Diep blushed, thanking her profusely as she handed over the fruits. As the morning went on, their stall grew busier. A group of women stopped by, curious about the fresh persimmons. One of them, wearing a floral shirt and carrying a basket, said, "These look so fresh. I'll take 2 kilos. Diep weighed the fruits with confidence, smiling brightly. "Thank you, Chi. Here you go." James stood nearby, occasionally helping with the calculations, proud of how quickly Diep was adapting. Just as they were in the middle of a sale, James' phone rang. He frowned, answered it, and heard an urgent voice on the other end. "On James, you need to come to the company right now, there's an emergency." James sighed, turning to Diep. "I have to go handle something important. Can you stay here and sell on your own?" Diep nodded, though she felt a bit nervous. "Yes, I'll be fine. You go ahead." James gave her a few more instructions before hurrying off. Diep sat alone at the stall, continuing to sell the persimmons. She weighed the fruits, handed them to customers, and glanced at the bustling crowd, thinking to herself, "I have to sell all of these to make on James happy." Gradually, the pile of persimmons dwindled, and soon, she had sold nearly everything. Diep smiled, whispering to herself, "I did it." As she packed up the last few persimmons, a young boy ran up to her stall, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Are those persimmons? Can I have one?" he asked. Diep smiled and handed him a small fruit for free, saying, "Here, try it. It's really sweet." The boy's face lit up as he took a bite, and he ran off, shouting, "Thank you, Chi." Diep watched him go, feeling a sense of accomplishment. She looked around the market, taking in the vibrant energy, the vendors calling out, the chatter of buyers, the colors of the stalls. For a moment she felt like she belonged here, like she was part of something bigger. She tucked the money she earned into the small pouch James had given her, her heart swelling with pride. Before leaving the stall, Diep took one last persimmon and bit into it, savoring its sweetness. She thought about how much she had learned that day, not just from the lesson with Ms. Hung, but from this experience at the market. She felt braver, more capable, and ready for whatever came next. With the mat folded and the baskets empty, Diep decided to take a walk around the market. She wanted to see more of this lively place before heading home, her mind buzzing with the day's events and the people she had met. After selling all the persimmons, Diep tidied up her stall and tucked the money into the small pouch James had given her. The market was still bustling, with people buying and selling, their voices filling the air with a lively hum. Diep decided to take a stroll, eager to explore the city market and see what else it had to offer. She walked past vibrant flower stalls, where bouquets of golden chrysanthemums and red roses were displayed in abundance. A woman selling flowers, wearing a conical hat, called out to her, "Young lady, buy some flowers to decorate your home. They're beautiful." Diep smiled, shaking her head. "Thank you, Chi, but I'm just looking around for now." The woman nodded and turned to other customers. Diep continued on, passing stalls of fresh vegetables, piles of potatoes, bundles of green herbs, all neatly arranged. The aroma of sizzling bonzio from a nearby food stall made her pause, her stomach growling. But she shook her head, reminding herself, "I need to go home and cook dinner. I can't spend money on snacks." As she walked, the sound of a guitar caught her attention, its gentle melodic notes rising above the market's noise. Curious, Diep followed the sound to a corner of the street, where a young man in a black shirt sat on a small stool, playing with deep focus. In front of him was a cloth hat with a few coins scattered inside. Diep stopped to watch, captivated by the music. The man had a kind face, his eyes closed as he lost himself in the melody, a familiar folk tune that reminded Diep of the countryside, of quiet afternoons by the fields. She smiled, feeling a wave of calm wash over her as the music filled the air. She stood there for a while, until the musician finished his song. He opened his eyes, noticed Diep, and asked with a friendly smile, "Did you like the song, Guy?" Diep nodded shyly, replying, "Yes, you play so beautifully. It made me think of home." The musician grinned, introducing himself. "Thank you. I'm Fong. What's your name?" Diep answered, "I'm Diep." They chatted for a bit, and Diep found Fong to be warm and easy to talk to. Fong picked up his guitar again, strumming a few chords. "This next song is for you, Diep," he said with a wink. The melody was soft and cheerful, matching the bright energy of the market. Diep clapped along, her earlier nervousness fading away as she enjoyed the moment. A small crowd began to gather, drawn by Fong's music. Diep noticed a little girl in the crowd, swaying to the rhythm, her eyes wide with wonder. Diep smiled at her, feeling a connection through the shared joy of the music. For a brief moment, she forgot her worries about James and the day's events. As Fong played, Diep thought about how music could bring people together, even strangers in a busy market. She felt grateful for this unexpected encounter, a small bright spot in her day. When the song ended, she dropped a few coins into Fong's hat, saying, "Thank you, Fong. I hope I'll hear you play again someday." Fong nodded, his smile warm. "I'm here every weekend, Diep. Come back anytime." Diep waved goodbye, her heart lighter as she turned to head home, the melody still echoing in her mind. While Diep was enjoying her time with the street musician, James was facing a stressful situation. He had ridden his motorbike to a small cafe, where he was supposed to meet a business partner to discuss a crucial project. His company was in financial trouble, and this deal was his last hope to turn things around. James sat at a corner table ordering a black coffee, his eyes glued to the clock on his wrist. It was already 15 minutes past the agreed time, but his partner hadn't shown up. Anxiety crept in and he gripped his phone tightly, thinking, "If they don't come, my company won't survive this month." The cafe was cozy with orange-painted walls that gave off a warm vibe, but James felt anything but warm. He stared at the door, hoping to see his partner walk in. A waiter passed by, asking, "Would you like anything else on?" James shook his head, his voice low. "No, thank you." Just then his phone rang. He answered quickly, hearing a hurried voice on the other end. James, it's Min. I'm so sorry, I'm stuck in traffic, but I'm on my way." James let out a sigh of relief, though his impatience lingered. "All right, just hurry, I'm waiting." While waiting, James' thoughts drifted to Diep. He wondered if she had sold all the persimmons, if she was managing okay on her own. The image of her smiling face calmed him for a moment, but the stress quickly returned as he thought about his company's dire situation. If this deal fell through, he wouldn't know how to keep supporting Diep, whom he had come to see as a little sister. Finally, Min arrived, dressed in a black suit, his demeanor rushed as he apologized repeatedly. "I'm so sorry for keeping you waiting." James nodded, trying to stay composed. "It's fine, let's get started." They sat down and began discussing the project, but the more they talked, the more James sensed Min's lack of enthusiasm. Min kept raising difficult demands, adding to James' mounting pressure. The conversation grew tense, with Min's tone becoming more dismissive. James felt his frustration rising, but he forced himself to stay calm, knowing how much was at stake. He tried to steer the discussion back to the benefits of the project, but Min seemed unconvinced, his responses cold and calculated. As they spoke, James noticed a couple at a nearby table, laughing and sharing a meal. Their carefree happiness contrasted sharply with his own anxiety, making him feel even more isolated. He wished he could be back at the market with Diep, away from this high-stakes meeting that was going nowhere. Min finally leaned back, crossing his arms. "I'll need to think about this more, James. I can't commit right now." James' heart sank, but he nodded, forcing a smile. "I understand. Let me know soon." Inside, he felt a storm brewing, unsure of what to do next. As he left the cafe, James took a deep breath, trying to clear his mind. He knew he had to find another way to save his company, but the weight of the day was starting to take its toll. Diep left the market, her heart still light from her encounter with Fong. She walked along the familiar village path, flanked by green fields and distant mountains shrouded in mist. When she reached home, she began her daily chores, feeding the chickens, ducks, and her little dog, whom she called MIT. She opened the coop, scattering grains for the chickens, saying softly, "Eat up so you can lay eggs for me." The chickens clucked happily, pecking at the grains, making Diep giggle. She then fed the ducks and petted MIT, who wagged his tail and nuzzled her leg. Looking around, she felt a pang of loneliness. "I wonder if Aunt James is back yet." Diep went to the kitchen to start cooking dinner. She lit the fire, the flames crackling warmly as she prepared the meal. She washed the rice, placed it on the stove, and reheated some fish stew she had made the day before, along with a small bowl of greens. The aroma of the stew filled the air, making her stomach rumble. She smiled, thinking, "When Aunt James gets back, I'll tell him about selling all the persimmons." The rice finished cooking, and Diep set the table neatly, arranging the food with care. She sat down, but as she looked at the empty chair across from her, a wave of sadness hit her. James still hadn't returned. She waited, then waited some more, but there was no sign of him. Diep sighed, murmuring to herself, "He must be really busy. I'll eat first." She picked up her chopsticks, but each bite felt tasteless. Diep remembered the meal she and James had shared, how he would tell her funny stories and encourage her to keep learning. Now, sitting alone at the table, she felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness. Outside, the chickens clucked softly, their sounds amplifying her solitude. After finishing, Diep cleared the table and sat on the porch, gazing at the path leading to the village. She hoped to see James coming home, but only the golden hues of the sunset greeted her, painting the sky in warm tones. Diep hugged her knees, whispering, "When he comes back tomorrow, I'll tell him about the market." The evening air grew cooler, and Diep wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. She thought about the day's events, the lesson with Ms. Hung, the market, and meeting Fong. Despite her loneliness, she felt a small spark of pride for all she had accomplished. MIT trotted over, resting his head on her lap. Diep stroked his fur, finding comfort in his presence. "At least I have you, MIT," she said softly, smiling at the little dog. The stars began to appear in the sky, twinkling like tiny promises of a better tomorrow. Diep stood up, deciding to write down the letters she had learned that day. She wanted to show James how much she had improved when he returned. With a piece of charcoal and an old notebook, she carefully traced the A and B, her determination growing with each stroke. As the night deepened, Diep lit a small lantern, its warm glow illuminating the porch. She sat there a little longer, listening to the crickets and hoping that wherever James was, he was safe and would come home soon. While Diep waited at home, James was dealing with a devastating turn of events. His meeting with Min had ended poorly. Min refused to sign the contract, citing that James' company lacked the resources to handle the project. James had tried to persuade him, but Min shook his head. "I'm sorry, James. I can't take the risk." James left the cafe, his heart heavy with disappointment. He rode his motorbike toward home, his mind racing with worry. Suddenly, his phone rang again. A panicked employee shouted on the other end, "On James, the warehouse is on fire. You need to come now." James' heart stopped, and he immediately turned his bike around, speeding toward the warehouse. When he arrived, thick black smoke billowed into the sky, and bright red flames roared through the warehouse. The fire brigade was already there, but the situation looked dire. James ran toward the scene, shouting, "Is anyone hurt?" An employee replied, "No one but the goods inside. I think they're all gone." James stood frozen, the reality sinking in like a heavy stone. He watched the flames, his chest tightening with pain. The warehouse held all the goods his company was set to export, the last hope to keep his business afloat. Now everything was turning to ash. James sank to the ground by the roadside, his hands clutching his head, overwhelmed by the loss. Night fell, and James still couldn't return home. He called Diep, his voice weary. "Diep, I have an emergency. Go to bed, don't wait for me, okay?" Diep heard the exhaustion in his tone but didn't press him, replying softly, "Yes, on. Please take care of yourself." James hung up, staring at the smoldering remains of the warehouse, now reduced to charred debris. Despite the devastation, a fire of determination ignited within him. He couldn't give up, not for his company and not for Diep, whom he had promised a better life. The firefighters finally put out the last of the flames, leaving behind a scene of destruction. James walked through the wreckage, salvaging what little he could. A few scorched crates remained, but most of the goods were unsalvageable. He clenched his fists, vowing to find a way forward. One of his employees approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll get through this, the employee said, his voice steady. James nodded, grateful for the support, but the weight of responsibility still pressed heavily on him. He knew the road ahead would be tough, but he couldn't let Diep down. As the moon rose, James sat on a nearby bench staring at the stars. He thought about Diep, wondering how her day at the market had gone. The thought of her smile gave him a flicker of hope, a reminder of why he had to keep fighting. With a deep breath, James stood up, ready to face the challenges ahead. He would rebuild no matter what it took. For Diep, for his employees, and for himself, he would find a way to rise from the ashes of this disaster.
Cuộc sống của người dân ở vùng núi thường có những đặc điểm riêng biệt do điều kiện địa lý và khí hậu. Dưới đây là một số nét đặc trưng của cuộc sống của người dân vùng núi. Hoạt động sản xuất nông nghiệp, người dân ở vùng núi thường trồng các loại cây như lúa, ngô, khoai, sắn, chăn nuôi các loại gia súc như trâu, bò, lợn, gà, rừng, khai thác rừng thu nhập sản phẩm rừng từ như gỗ, tre, nấm. Đời sống hàng ngày, nhà ở thường được xây dựng bằng các vật liệu tự nhiên như gỗ, tre, lá. Ăn uống thực phẩm thường được chế biến từ sản phẩm địa phương như gạo, ngô, rau, thịt. Mặc đẹp, trang phục thường được may từ các vải tự nhiên như vải cotton, vải lanh. Văn hóa phong tục, lễ hội được tổ chức, lễ hội cầu mưa, cầu mùa, lễ giỗ tổ, giỗ tiên.